Our guest has checked into the studio now. Mwenda Thuranira is the CEO of MySpace Properties. He's in the real estate space. We are going to talk about Africa's housing. Mwenda, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you today?
Very well. Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you.
We call that the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Yes.
Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
Now, Siti is not here today. Siti has been very busy this week, so he took some time off.
Okay.
But he left me with the day's proverb.
Okay.
Every week he goes into one African country. He then brings us a proverb a day from that country. This week, the proverbs are from Angola. Mm-hmm. Your job is to listen to the proverb and then give us your interpretation of that proverb.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Angolan proverb of the day. In the larger affairs, the minor are forgotten. In the larger affairs, the minor are forgotten.
Okay. The majority carries the day, and the minority have their say.
Allah. And what do you think?
I think.
You think?
I've been thinking a lot
you
this
have
week.
seen. You think, and therefore you see.
And therefore I am. Yeah, I can see it.
In the larger affairs, the minor are forgotten. The majority
Have their way.
have their way and the minority have their say.
Yes.
That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one. Wonder, you've been in the real estate sector for a number of years.
Yes.
Just tell us, in summary, that journey and what MySpace Properties is all about.
Okay. In summary, my name is Mwenda Thuranira, the CEO of MySpace Properties, and I'm director at My Town Malls. And we're involved in real estate development, real estate management, real estate sales. And basically, we're in the real estate space. And especially right now, we are focusing on affordable housing and commercial real estate. MySpace Properties has been there for almost 16 years now. We started way in Mombasa. We're there for 10 years. And now we've been in Nairobi for 5 years. And we are looking to grow into this space within Kenya and within Africa. Yes.
This real estate sector, how is it faring in the country? People have talked about very many things over very many years recently. First of all, there's a housing boom. This is going to bust. And then there's a commercial real estate boom. It's going to bust. I mean, look at all these properties coming up. And then there's an issue of where is all this money coming from and flooding the market in Kenya's real estate? Land shooting up in prices and then buildings starting and finishing within a very short time. What does that tell us?
Of course, real estate busting in a developing country like Kenya is almost an impossible affair. You've seen what happens. There can be a bubble burst in real estate when there's an overexposure to credit. But when we look at the situation in Kenya, almost everything is, I can say, is cash. I mean, how many mortgages do we have in Kenya? Less than 500,000. Maybe if it goes more, it's like 1 million. Out of the almost 50 million Kenyans, I mean, that's a very small exposure. So that can only happen when the exposure to credit is high, like the way it was in America, in UK, and other places. Where you find is the opposite. The credit exposure is way higher than cash, than the people with cash. So many people buy properties, people buy land, people build their own houses in Kenya. And I mean, the borrowing is not very high. The exposure to credit is not high. And of course, being a developing country, according to research, in the next, by 2050, almost 50% of Kenyans will be living in urban areas. So we'll continue to witness more growth in the urban areas, areas like Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, and now even the counties are coming up with development where people need decent housing. I mean, people are educated now, not like before somebody used to carry a djembe. Every day you wake up, you live in the village all your life. Right now you see people like the youth now, they are more into border, power source, and they're educated, they want to come to the city, they want jobs, the computers, people are making money in that sector, so people need decent housing. So it's to say the demand for housing will continue growing in this country, and we have not even scratched the surface yet. We are way off.
So I mean, this is the thing, because there are very many things that are said. We know what United Nations SDGs have been. We know what the MDGs were. We know what many organizations call the necessity to have dignified housing or decent housing. And I think it's important for us to hear this again. What is decent? When we say decent housing, a roof over your head, access to plumbing, doesn't that cut it? What's decent housing?
Decent housing is basically when you have like power, you have water. I mean, as you said, you have a roof over your head. I mean, housing is a basic necessity. Everybody needs it by the end of the day. People have to live somewhere. That's why we are really advocating for mortgage industry to be streamlined so that people can have money to purchase houses. We also advocating for TPS, tenant purchase schemes, where you can pay pole and eventually you end up owning the house. Yes.
Okay. So decent housing means that you should be able to, you have access, like you said, access to power, plumbing, a roof over your head that you can live and go. So that's decent housing. So then what is affordable housing?
So affordable housing is that. Yes, it's decent housing. And affordable housing is where, for example, in Kenya, is anything 3 million and below. That's affordable housing.
It's not pegged to how much it's not pegged to what your purchasing power is as an individual?
Not really. It's not pegged on how much is. I mean, coming from where I come from, we're in the real estate development and real estate sales. And of course, it's what sellable in the market.
Okay.
I've seen, of course, when you say affordable housing and housing for the less fortunate is way two different things. Since by the end of the day, for example, somebody doesn't have a job, even if your house, the mortgage was 10,000 per month, they could not afford. That's why, like I have seen it in the other countries, when it comes to the less fortunate, the government has to house them. The way the government builds infrastructure like stadiums and roads and stuff, it should be able to build for the poor. Since no matter how much you put, even if you put 2,000, it still be affordable to some people. So they should be provided housing as a social responsibility part of the government to house its people.
And that's where the social housing comes in.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have a social housing aspect.
Yes.
Even in the housing program by the government, there's a social housing, and then there's the affordable housing, and then there's the market rate housing. Three categories of houses that are brought to the market.
Yes.
Right now, the conversation in Parliament is on the affordable housing bill.
Yes.
And of course, this started last year with a proposal to have a tax, a levy, whatever you want to call it. They kept changing the terminology here for housing. And in response to that, we saw very many people, some experts in the real estate sector, others economists and all, saying, we do not have a housing problem in this country. What do you say?
Of course, there's a housing problem. It's there, and it's a big one. And as I said...
How so? Because the argument was, unajua watu wangapi wamelala nje leo, wewe. That was the argument. People are waking up from a house today.
You know, one thing is, out of 10 Kenyans, only one owns her house. 9 are renters.
Okay.
So that shows you the way the gap is.
Okay.
And eventually now, for example, this person might lose a job or might get old and now they can't afford to pay the rent anymore. What happens to this person? He needs to live somewhere by the end of the day. So housing sector, we really need to push really hard to have more houses. And when it comes to government housing, the social fund, of course, if it's corrected and managed well, then it will work, since it works in other countries. I mean, if you go even to grown economies like America, you go to maybe Australia and somewhere else, they have a housing fund. But this is used to put in a kitty for mortgages.
Okay.
Since the issue is affordability. Of course, if there's available finance where people can borrow and buy houses, since it's highly capital intensive and actually is one of the biggest investment almost everybody makes in life. So if there's a source of finance for them to buy houses, I mean, the private sector will build as many as possible. And then there will be that factor of supply and demand in the market. If you build good houses, if you have a good track record, of course you'll get more
You
buyers.
attract the customers.
Exactly.
But is the private sector building houses that are below 3 million? You said 3 million shillings is what we consider affordable houses.
Yes, correct.
Is the private sector building houses that are less than a million, 1.5 million, 2 million?
No, less than 3 million, yes. They are there.
2 million?
2 million, they're there. I've seen.
Sufficient number to address that need that you said we have a need?
Of course, not sufficient. Not sufficient at all. We need more. We need more of that.
So there's a need for more housing because what is available in the country is not enough.
Yes.
But there's also a need then to provide this housing in a manner that some folks can actually purchase. Because what we're saying is that folks should own their own homes.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That the renters, the 9 out of 10 are renters. And that what we are striving for is that more individuals own their own homes, or more families, whatever, own their own homes.
Yeah.
So what's the block? What's the block between having more housing available in the country and then having more people being able to afford to purchase? What stops this thing from happening? Because that number has been thrown at us forever. I think just 3 short years ago it was there are only 25,000 mortgages in Kenya. There are only 50,000 mortgages in Kenya. There must be something that's stopping people from getting from this point to owning.
Okay, number one is access to finance. Access, affordable mortgages. That what will push people to own houses. Since like what happens in Kenya, let's say because we don't have much streamlined mortgages, if somebody wants maybe to get a mortgage or financing to own a home, they go to one bank. They are denied after waiting for so long, doing valuations, going to see the houses. Then they go to another bank. They are denied. That person, in life, the moment you mention mortgage, he doesn't want even to see you.
Yeah.
And in fact, they will hate that word mortgage.
What's the reason they're denied the mortgage?
The reason, of course, is the affordability and the rules put for mortgages. You know, like before, the beauty of it now, we have the KMRC mortgage, which is really working well since they're charging 9% interest rate and they can do up to 25 years. That will really help Kenyans. And it's our hope it can come even lower since when you have a house, it's a tangible asset. And somebody by the end of the day, no matter the situation, they have to live somewhere. So before, the way it was, like if you were to borrow, let's say now the interest rate are 19% or 20%. For somebody who wants to buy a house, for somebody who wants to buy a car. You see, a car is more temporary.
Yeah.
A house, you live there for life. So, and in case of any default, you have an asset which you can hold. So for mortgages, the rules for it should be more, the banks should be more flexible and the government should encourage more and even drop the rate to less than 9% interest rate.
Do you think that the government approach then, because I mean it's all over the place, isn't it, Mwenda? Right now, that a little bit of your salary goes towards government then being able to put up houses, right? Do you think that's the way government should go? Or kind of like what you alluded to before, how about a kitty whereby folks then will be able to borrow from the government and purchase their own homes that, according to what you're saying, the private sector is more than able to put up around the country?
But now, how will you borrow from the government without a kitty for that?
That's what I'm saying. Do you think that should be the thing? That there should be a kitty?
The affordable housing fund
should be a kitty that people can borrow from.
Yeah, exactly.
should go to KMRC.
Exactly. To KMRC.
Okay.
Exactly. So that the access to finances, you know, in a development, there are two major costs. The cost of land, the cost of finance. Those are the ones which determines the cost of the house eventually. So if that cost is brought down, if that kitty, that's why I said if it's managed well, it can work for this country. And the deficit of housing can go lower and lower.
Our guest this morning is Mwenda Thuranira. He's the CEO of MySpace Properties. He's in the real estate sector. As the conversations about the affordable housing bill goes back into Parliament now after the committee report, then now the full House will start debating it. We still ask ourselves, what is the solution to the housing issue in the country? So in the 2019 census, the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics told us that there were about 49 million Kenyans. Looking at that in the 2009 census shows you that Kenyans are increasing by a population of 1 million a year. 1 million a year. So 2020, we were 30 million. 2050, how many years is it from 2020? 30.
From 2024 to 2050?
2020 to 2050.
30, yes.
30. If we were 30 million in 2020, what's the population likely going to be in 2050?
Probably going to double.
Okay. So about 60 million or so are going to be in this country. And Mwenda, you've told us, statistics have shown that projected by 2050, half of Kenya's population will be living in urban areas.
Correct.
Right? So we are saying over 40 million people in this country will be living in urban areas. Now, those ones are not in their shambas. They'll be living in some houses in urban settlements. Cities like Nairobi, Kisumu, Nakuru, Eldoret, Mombasa, other cities will have emerged then, and so on and so forth. So where are these people going to live? And this is where now the housing issue comes in. We can see presently in Nairobi, more than 50% of the population in Nairobi is living in what would be considered not
informal,
proper housing, informal housing, right? Half of Nairobi is informal. Now you can imagine if we just go another 25 years from today, how's it going to look like? If we don't start addressing the issue now, problem. You say the route to go is to think broadly and see how does private sector play, how do we make it affordable for people to live in these houses? Now, question number one, must people own homes? Must these 40 million people who will be living in urban areas from towns to cities in this country, must they live in their own homes?
No, of course they must not. But if you see at that gap, if out of 10 Kenyans, 9 are renters, at least it needs to be half-half. Since when you own a home, it's a way of wealth creation. It's a way of building a nation. I mean, it's a way of creating employment. And I mean, it has so many advantages. And in Kenya, it's different from the other parts of the world. Kenyans are more into owning land, owning properties. It's our culture.
Yeah.
We can't run away from it. And I believe it's not a bad culture, but eventually, I mean, if we have that investment culture in ourselves, as a country, we'll go far. Yeah.
Then, for people to own homes, must they use borrowing? If the trend in this country is cash buying and borrowing or mortgage, long-term financing for owning a home is not the way to go, why must we push people into that direction?
Of course, not everybody has cash. I agree with you fully. But we need to invent ways of being affordable by many people. I think if we have good financial instruments, like for example, number one, we said about mortgages, then there's this thing called tenant purchase schemes, whereby if somebody, let's say you have funding, you go somewhere and obtain funding for 50 billion. You come do development and you do tenant purchase agreement where it's by, let's say somebody is able to pay 15,000 per month for a house, for a mortgage, for a period of, let's say, 50 years. Or if they can pay early, the better. Then if you load, let's say, interest of 20%, 15, it will come less than 16,000. The difference is small. So once that thing is packaged, for an investor with an income for 20% return per year, that will make a lot of sense. I think even when it comes to other forms of investment, like if you put your money in the bank, if you buy treasury bonds, it doesn't get, if you invest in stocks, you don't get that 20%. So it makes it lucrative for investor. So people would be more willing to put their money in this market. Yes.
What for you would make sense? As you look at it now, with the current situation, what we've already established, what would make sense? What government is proposing today, government of Kenya is proposing today, and says, you know what, let's hive off part of your earnings and let's put this into this fund that will then ensure that houses then are bought by Kenyans, and then would essentially solve this problem that you speak of. Is that a better way to do this, or are we saying no? Where are the other options in the private sector whereby you pay to own? What I'm paying in rent to you today, Mwenda, goes on a reducing, and I keep going, and the unit eventually becomes my own. Do you see what's happening now with government, or what government wants to do moving forward as a solution to this issue? Because on the many times that the president, for example, has spoken, he said that very same thing that you've said, that there's just not enough, that we want dignified, decent, affordable housing for Kenyans. You're saying the same thing. Do you agree on the method?
No, of course, for sure, I know Kenyans right now are overtasked, and the economy is not at its best. I mean, there are no jobs. There are job cuts all over, and also people doing business, they are being taxed heavily. Of course, it's not the right time, but in fact, I can see it's the only way. In fact, we have two ways. One way is being able to have affordable finance for development and affordable land for development. And that one, the government has to come in so that the houses can be affordable. Another way is the one I told you about, if we have investments maybe from outside or from within, where people have like these tenant purchase schemes. I mean, for investors or for business people, they are profit driven. And of course, if there's profit to be made, they'll be there. Everybody will jump in that space. But both of them going hand in hand, I think then we'll solve this equation of housing. Since the problem lies in the finance, nowhere else.
So I see that the hand in hand happening. If I look at what the government has started doing, so the hand in hand is happening. So the government is coming in with the interventions, provide land, give tax rebates, remove VAT, remove make cement and other inputs cheaper, and then partner with a private sector player.
Yes.
So say MySpace Properties comes and bids to be the one that does this project in this particular area. Government has taken care of land. Government is making sure that you get cement at a lower tax, you're getting steel at lower tax, and all those other things, right? And then government is guaranteeing you offtake. That's the current scheme.
Exactly.
And the offtake is coming from the housing fund.
Yes.
So it says, once you finish, I will give you your money. You go. I will be left with the tenant who will be paying the 20,000 a month for the next 25, 30 years to own this home.
Yes.
And you as a private sector, then you have the money to go and invest elsewhere.
Yes.
And also maybe participate in the next scheme.
Yes.
Is that the 50-50 that we're talking about? Or is there a problem in that model?
No, of course, the structure is not yet done. But these things take time.
What do you mean the structure is not done? That's what they're doing, isn't it?
Yeah, but we are not there yet. We have not structured it properly.
What's missing?
For example, these funds which is being corrected, in fact, it should go more into affordable mortgages, even more than development, more into structuring the mortgage industry, since that's where the problem lies. I mean, if people are, as I said, if people are able to borrow or borrow for mortgages, borrow money, instead of paying the rent, they pay mortgage so that eventually they own. That will solve the equation. The private sector will do development more than any government can do. So I'm more into that one where we have borrowing power and then get investors involved through like tenant purchase schemes, which will work very well, especially for the low income, where he said you can pay a mortgage of 15,000, you can pay a mortgage of 20,000. Then even a border operator a driver, somebody will be able to afford a house.
Let me see if I get you right.
Yes.
So, Mwenda Thuranira's proposal, this housing fund, if it's collected,
Yes.
it goes into, say, Kenya Mortgage Refinance
Yes.
Company.
Yes.
Right now, Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company gets money from the government. Well, not much. Gets money from World Bank.
Yes.
Gets money from Shelter Afrique and others
Yeah.
that give money into these financial institutions that are partners
Yes, correct.
of the KMRC. So the financial institutions take this money, let's say at 5%, and then they put their own markup for administration and all, and that's why the loan comes to 8%
Yes.
for the borrower.
Yes.
So you say if we increase the money to KMRC,
Yes.
then the financial institutions, the SACCOs and banks can actually get this money at 1%,
Exactly.
which means that they can lend to us at 3%. And it will be able to buy houses.
Exactly.
And then Mwenda can also go and borrow from this KMRC for development
Yes.
at whatever higher interest.
Yes.
But the money will be available.
Yes.
Once you put the houses up, Eric, can go to KMRC and take a 3% mortgage.
Yes.
And that will be a faster way of addressing this challenge.
Of course. And that's why it works elsewhere.
Okay.
That's how it works elsewhere.
Yes.
Another thing that you've said is that the private sector is then able to harness development better than government. How is that?
How is that? Of course, with the government, with the bureaucracy and all that, it takes forever. Even that's why up to now, we don't have, of all this affordable housing, there's no one project we can pinpoint and say, this was done by government. Not yet.
Well, they tell us all the
What do you
time
mean?
about Ngara and it's complete.
Bondeni is complete.
Bondeni is complete.
It's
Already
on sale.
people living there.
It's on sale. It's up for sale now. People
Yeah, for sale, yes. But look at it, how many years now?
No, Bondeni
On
just
the-
completed.
On the
other
private
day.
sector, how many developments have come up?
You tell us, by the MySpace properties, how many developments have you done in the last, say, 10 years?
I mean, we have been involved in so many projects. Way too many.
So
And
hundreds of units,
Hundreds of units.
all occupied.
Some are occupied.
All many.
Some are ongoing, and others on planning stage. Like, for example, right now, this one we're doing here in Sand Park in Syokimau, just down the road from here. I mean, it's a project on 26 acres, like 1,500 units. And I mean, it's a good location to be at, especially if you work in a place like here. And we are selling at a 1 bedroom at 6.5, 2 bedroom at 8 million, and 3 bedroom for 10 million. And the uptake so far is good. The first phase is 360 units. We have already sold like 200 units. In fact, this weekend we have an open house. Tomorrow and Sunday. People can come and see what's available. And I mean, the uptake is good. It shows you Kenyans have appetite for housing.
But is that now, as you say that, is that directly fulfilling the need that you talk about? Because what that's essentially where we started this is that there's a problem, there's a deficit in houses that are available. But we're also saying that the private sector, I mean, just from the example that you've given, is filling up this quota really quickly. It could be because it's for commercial or for private business. Obviously, if it's for private business and you know that this is where you want to go in terms of meeting a bottom line, then of course it makes sense. But is private sector actually contributing to filling this deficit of housing that there is in the country, or is it a byproduct of the commercial desire to be in business? It's going to happen anyway. Because we're in business, we'll build houses.
And people need houses.
And people need houses.
Anyway.
So private business is filling this deficit. The filling of the deficit is a byproduct of being in business.
Of course.
It's not to say that private and government are working together to bridge this housing divide or deficit.
No, now for like a project like this, the KMLC mortgage, they finance you to unit up to 8 million. Anything above 8 million, you have to top up.
Yeah.
So we fall within that bracket. For example, if the 2 bedroom is 8 million, you're able to get the KMRC mortgage through our partner banks like Stanbic and KCB, and among other institutions. Hopefully, Eco Bank is part of it. I would like to have a conversation with them, and also they can be part of us to be able to finance the end users.
But you see, like Ndu is asking, are you addressing that need? At 8 million shillings for a 2-bedroom, that is not in the affordable bracket, right? That is 5 million shillings above what you said would be the affordable bracket.
Yes.
So when the people are purchasing these units at 8 million shillings, of course the rents are higher.
Yes.
So the people that right now are living in informal houses are not going to move into these houses. So we are still not addressing the need for people who are coming out of college, have no jobs, they have just started a job, and they will not be able to afford this kind of rent. How do we address this issue right now, where the people currently are paying rent of 1,000, 2,000 shillings a month, but they are living in mabati and cotton and mud houses in the city, without toilets, without water, without roads, with illegal connections for electricity and all these other things? How do we address that issue? The people who are paying 2,000 shillings today for rent, how do we give them houses?
Okay, number one, when you're in business, you choose a sector which you want to play in. And you have your clientele, your buyers, you know them very well before you do a project. And I believe there are other people playing in other sectors. And that's why I'm addressing this thing of tenant purchase schemes, especially people paying 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. That will be the only solution. If you have a scheme maybe for 50 years, for 30 years, that's the only way it would be possible. But if you are doing it as a business, now you have to choose your sector and do your calculations, see where your profitability and what problem you're solving. Yeah.
You talked about access to credit and land being the most expensive factors then in owning a unit or even renting at this point, because all of that is lumped onto how much you're going to pay, right? Could you imagine a situation whereby government and private sector entered into this marriage whereby they say, oh, obviously, you guys have the tools of trade, you have the expertise, you're putting up developments all over the place. You talked about MySpace doing that, putting up developments all over the place. Could you imagine a partnership for the nation whereby the folks who are in the business and then the government, which has the muscle now in terms of land, the one most expensive factor in all of this, whereby government is able to say, let's go ahead and build this and then, activate the purchasing power. So we're doing all these things at the same time without taking more money away from Kenyans, right? Activate this fund. This asset of land which government has, the largest owner of land in the country is government, right? And then use your private sector, because you're giving them something, the developers such as yourselves, to put up housing that is actually affordable. But these three are working in tandem. The fund, government in terms of offering up the assets, and then private sector to come in and activate with the tools of trade to put this up. That to me seems like the best of these three worlds, whereby yes, then somebody is actually able to pay something as low as, whatever per month, but it eventually is your own. Would something like that not seem most workable?
That's the ideal scenario, and that's the way it should be, in fact. And that's the direction we should be driving towards. I mean, since, as you said, the government owns the land, the government has the money, and especially now that they have a housing fund, they have KMRC and other options, then that's the ideal scenario. I like that. Yeah.
Because that's then where social housing goes. That's what social housing is, essentially. That you can then own. It's on government land, but because it's government land, it is subsidized, greatly. I think the only way to fill this hole or to bridge this gap is to take away the most expensive element, because the gap is caused by people not having. That's it. It's nothing special. It's not. There's no rocket science to it. It's just because people can't afford the thing, and that's why there is a gap.
Yes.
To close it would mean removing the most expensive element.
Exactly.
And bringing Constant Cap, who's a planner, is commenting on social media and talking about the social housing aspect, where we say that social housing, of course, is, like you said, for the people who are in the low income brackets, who will not be able to afford purchasing of homes, then they should be able to rent those homes. Okay? So looking at the kind of urban population that we have, the percentage of people who are living in informal settlements and all, and then looking on the other side of the affordable bracket, should government play on both sides, or should it choose one? Should it play on social and affordable and market housing like it's doing presently? Or do you think the government should only focus on social housing, where you're building houses for rent, people will move in here, they'll rent, they don't have to buy. The homes are owned by the government through the municipals, the councils and all. And then you, private sector, play in the affordable bit.
Exactly.
Explain.
Yes. Of course, the social housing is a responsibility for the government. And the way I've seen it work in other economies is whereby somebody who develops high-end houses, when you go to, you develop high-end housing, then you develop affordable, low-cost housing. You get big tax breaks for doing that on your other big project. So that one, they can all grow together. Let's say I'm doing a development in Runda or Mudaiga, where I'm selling a unit for 200 million. Then I get a tax break if I'm going to develop something in let's say I'm going somewhere in Adiriva, Kitengera, in Kawangware. If I'm going to do affordable housing somewhere, I get a big tax break even more on my other projects. That's when I've seen it encourage developers to focus on both markets, where they don't, since of course when you're doing high-end units, there's more profit. But on this, like for example, I'll give you a scenario. You do 10 houses. You make the same profit where you do 100 houses. Would you rather deal with 10 people or 100 people?
10.
Of course, 10.
10 people. So that's the ideal scenario.
Where do we see us going in the future? And the future could be tomorrow. A lot of things are still up in the air in terms of what's going to happen with this levy, with this fund, with et cetera, et cetera. But one thing that we do see very clearly is that private sector is going. The commercial aspect of real estate in the country, owning homes for individuals, they're still moving.
Yes.
Everybody's going like this. Will it meet at some point, do you think?
Eventually, the market forces will come to play. And of course, the private sector will have to play its part, and the government will have to play its part, and we all meet together somewhere. But for me, I'm really big on advocating streamlining. I don't know how many times I have to say that. Streamlining the mortgage industry or the tenant purchase schemes. That will sort this issue.
Did you make your presentations to the Joint Housing Committee at the National Assembly on this housing bill?
No, unfortunately, I didn't get to be part of that. But in some other forums, I've brought it up in other forums, and that's why I'm here to bring it up again. So hopefully somebody will hear me out, and something gets implemented.
Well, it's a big issue, like you're saying. Housing is a big issue. The conversation right now moves again into Parliament. The formalization of this housing project, it started from one end. First collect the money. Okay, so how are you managing the money? We need a bill. Let's take the bill to Parliament. Now the bill will be there. Now we have a bill that manages the money that we are collecting and then formalizing it. In the end, these conversations seem not to be meeting or converging. The private sector is saying one thing, the government is saying another thing. The experts in real estate, in housing, in planning are saying a different thing. Like Ndu was asking, do you see us actually having a solution soon? Do you?
Eventually, we have to come up with a solution. In fact, we don't have an option. We have to come up with a solution to address this issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully, it will not be at a higher cost than we are paying currently.
Yes, correct.
Mwenda Thuranira, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Mwenda is the CEO of MySpace Properties. He's a player in the real estate sector. We've been talking about housing, the housing problem, how to address it. He says, let's think of how we can make affordable access to credit, to mortgage.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.